My name is Colin Foulke. I'm a resident of Sebastopol. There's quite a few in the crowd who actually know me from the different hats I wear in town. One of the main hats I wear is I'm a lifeguard at Ives Pool 1 day a week, mostly just telling people to walk. I also wear another hat in town. I'm a trustee on the Sebastopol Union School Board, so shout out to my superintendent who's here. But tonight we're not going to talk about those hats. We're going to talk about this other hat that I've been wearing for the last 20 years, which is that I am someone who is extremely passionate about this musical instrument. It's called a handpan, and it's the first new musical instrument of the 21st century. It is not often that musical instruments come about. So before I jump in, actually, can you bring the lights up real quick? I'm just going to go ahead and play one, so you guys have some frame of reference of what we're working with. Thank you. So we are going to do a bunch of Q&A, and it's going to be after, so please hold your questions. I'm going to be thrilled to answer all of them. So this is me. And this is me at my tuning room in my workshop that's in the north of Santa Rosa. I'm a resident artist at Fulton Crossing, which is the old chicken processing plant, for those who know it, on River Road in Fulton. So we're going to jump right in just with the agenda today. So we're going to talk about the birth of a new musical instrument, specifically because this is such a rarity. It doesn't come around all that often. We're going to talk about my path from being a listener and a fan of these instruments to someone who started to play them. And then my transition from being a player to a teacher, someone who taught how to play these instruments. And then the big one is from being a teacher to a tuner. So going behind the scenes on the art form and really understanding how these instruments work and how we tune them. So we're going to talk about kind of my path. And then we're going to jump to how we make them. And we're going to go into the nitty-gritty of all the science and all the procedures and processes and what that looks like. I'm going to do a little bit of a brag reel. This career of mine has taken me to some really interesting places to meet some really interesting people, and I'll share a little bit of that with you guys. We're going to talk about the greater movement of this musical instrument today. From origin till now, it's 25 years old, so it is barely out of the womb. It is just starting to crawl, and I have some ideas of where I think it's going to go. And this is what we're going to talk about at the end of where I think it's all heading, what the patterns are showing us, what production looks like abroad, and how they're being used both by hobbyists and professionals. So the origins of this new musical instrument stem from two existing musical instruments. On the left side of the screen, we have something that's called a ghatam. It's a musical instrument that's used in Indian classical music, and it's known for its sharp percussive rhythms that you play on the body of the instrument. And then if you cup the top of that instrument, the open neck, it activates the sound chamber and creates a really deep bass note. So that's the first part of the inspiration. The second part of the inspiration is the steel pan. And I'm going to make a big emphasis to say I said steel pan, not steel drum. We'll get to the reasons why, but specifically we come from the steel pan. So there was this idea to merge the elements of these two instruments, the hand-played percussion and the deep bass of the ghatam, and then the singing steel melodies of the steel pan. When did this happen? I already kind of hinted at it. It happened in Bern, Switzerland in the year 2000. So people take all kinds of guesses. This must be an old world instrument. It must be from Africa. They really pretty much guess anywhere but Switzerland. And so this was the very original handpan. It didn't have that name then. But this was the inspiration. So what we see on screen was an attempt to take two steel pan shells. Steel pan shells are typically the size of a 55-gallon barrel, so anywhere from 22 to 24 inches in diameter, and they're usually quite deep. So the idea of putting something that big on your lap made this thing that was not at all playable. So this company, Panart, in Switzerland, took that basic idea and shrunk it down to something that would fit on your lap and something that would be playable and kind of accessible by your hands. And they called their version of the instrument hung. Now, there's a misnomer out there that maybe you've seen or read that says hang drum. That is incorrect. And in fact, they get really upset about it. So we don't call them hang drums. We call it hung. Hung means hand in the local Swiss German dialect. It also roughly translates to slope, kind of like a small hill, which is the shape of the instrument. So Panart is the company that originally developed this instrument in Switzerland in the year 2000. Their version of the instrument was called hung. I'm going to put on the screen all the different generations of their instrument. So they started in the year 2000, and by 2003 they were already deep into their first generation of instrument. Now, this already was taking on the shape and size of instruments that we still play today, but they did a lot of deep exploration into different types of materials and processes in which you could make steel instruments. We'll talk about that a little bit later in the process part of this. But from the year 2000, even beyond 2008 into 2010 and 11, they were mostly the only company that was in production of these instruments. And mostly you had to go to Switzerland to get one. So it meant that there was a real grassroots spread out of the EU. And it didn't really make it over here to the West Coast until mid to late 2000s. So around 2007, there was a company in the United States that wanted to make an attempt to make these instruments. But they ran into this interesting problem. There was the original company, Panart, who had their brand hung. So they couldn't use the name hung. They had to come up with some, let's call it an umbrella term. You know, they were making a Fender, so they couldn't go make another Fender. They had to make a guitar. So the name that was put together was this term handpan. So it was put together by a man named Kyle Cox. His company was Pantheon Steel, and he coined the term. So it was the merging of these two ideas, this steel pan that you played with your hands. And again, I'm going to put emphasis on that word pan because that is our direct predecessor. We come from the steel pan, and for Kyle, who was a steel pan maker, it was really, really important to him to honor the lineage of where it came from. So including the word pan was an attempt to tip the hat to Trinidad to say, hey, we recognize where we come from, and we're branching off to this new thing. So from 2007 on, these instruments were specifically referred to as handpan, the original one, hung. So this is where my story starts. So I have a background in Western classical music. I grew up in orchestras and symphonies as a cellist, but I opted to not take that to college with me. I was ready to break free of the constraints of Western classical. And this was kind of the era of when YouTube started, so it was a novelty that you could pass videos around amongst your friends. And a friend sent me this video, and it was something that I had never seen before. We're going to hit play and see if the sound works, and if not, we'll go solve that problem next. Takeaway, terrible video, sound was horrible, but it planted the seed in me of curiosity. This was an instrument that I had never seen before. I'd been taking college classes and world music classes, and I was absolutely stumped. I can tell you the day that I saw this video, I skipped all of my classes and was glued to my computer to figure out what is that instrument. As I said earlier, one of the issues in this time is there were very few instruments that had made it all the way to the West Coast. I was in California, in Southern California. And it took me about 2 years to get in person with one of these. And I was sleuthing the internet, I was on forums, this was before a lot of our Facebook and social media was in the thick of it. And eventually I found one that I got to borrow. And it was such an amazing moment for me in that I immediately knew this is exactly what I'm supposed to be doing. And I speak about this, that I was so thankful that I found what I was supposed to be doing at 22, because up until that point, I had no idea what I wanted to do. So in 2009, I borrowed one, and not long after, that company, Pantheon Steel, made me my first instrument, and I started playing. As a result of it being such a young art form, and me having a background in music that was applicable, I started playing at a level that offered me opportunities. So I started performing locally. This was a performance in, I think in LA. And then it wasn't long after that that I started to outgrow our local scene. Again, there was just a handful of players in California. We've got one of them here, Bruce. Bruce is an old-time friend. He was one of the very few back then that I found, and I've hung on to him for 20 years. But I wanted to pursue playing at a higher and higher level. And as a result, it meant that I had to travel internationally, specifically at the time to the UK. It was the only locale where they had a specific gathering for these instruments. And so in 2010, I started performing internationally. This is a photo from one of the gatherings. Looks like it was 2011. So I got on this pretty quick cycle of discovered it, started learning to play, was presented with opportunities, started traveling internationally. One really great thing that happened when I was in England is the man who coined that term handpan. I got to meet him, and eventually, and still is, a good friend of mine. But this is us performing at Stonehenge. But really quite a neat thing to get to be friends with the guy that made the word. And he's been a contemporary for a long time. So there was a gear shift that started to happen around this time. I had a lot of luck and privilege to get to travel and sit with some of the best players at the time, and as a result, I was able to absorb a lot of these early techniques of how we play them. And when I got home to California, there was a lot of people who were curious about these techniques I was doing, either from a performance, or they might say like, hey, what did you do in that video at 1 minute and 32 seconds with your right hand? There were enough of these specific questions that I started just fielding the questions and putting up tutorials on YouTube. So as early as 2010, I started putting up these tutorials. These were really rough and tumble videos. They were filmed in my bedroom, just looking above, lesser than iPhone quality. But this was enough to pass on the information. And as a result, other people started coming to me to learn how to play. This started this other journey as a teacher, which snowballed into the following thing. In 2012, I had an opportunity to do a big project in Berlin with this famous percussionist. His name is David Kucherman. And David and I worked together for 6 months to put together the very first DVD of how to play these instruments. It put us in this interesting position, which was, again, I was breaking free of the constraints of Western classical. The last thing I wanted to do was start making rules. So what we did with this DVD is we just presented it as, here's how these instruments are being played at this moment in time. And if you want to learn these techniques, it's right here. We offered it up very much as the salad bar approach. Take what you like, leave what you don't. Across 2012, I went to the festivals around the world and premiered this DVD, sold a bunch, and came back a year later, and to my surprise and absolute joy, the level of playing had risen significantly just through the sharing of information. This was one of our big goals with this project, was to up the level of playing around the world by just making information available. The other goal that has now happened years later is that this is absolutely out of date. It has progressed so much in the last 10 to 15 years that while this is still applicable if you're new to the art form, it has come so far from what we put down as the first that it really is kind of out of date. Also, nobody has a DVD player anymore. So teaching shifted, and that I have now started doing things like this, speaking about my career, speaking about the instrument. So in 2021, I got to go to Annalee High School, the local high school here, and I got to speak to their career class. If you're not familiar with the Annalee career class, it's a wonderful thing. They bring in people from all over the community. Bankers, policemen, firefighter, parks and rec, architect, doctor, me. And I very selfishly gave the talk that would have been really good for high school me, which is I gave the talk of, I had no idea what I wanted to do when I was your age. And in fact, the thing that I do now didn't exist when I was your age. And then beyond that, I really kind of promote that a lot of career paths are non-linear. I jumped around before I got here. I can make it look like a really nice story, but when it was lived, it felt sporadic and almost like jumping timelines. So sometimes I speak to my career. In the last few years, I have been invited to Sonoma State to be a guest lecturer, and I'm brought in for this one specific lecture where the first half of the lecture, the professor presents musical classification system. We have idiophones, membranophones, ones with strings, and he presents this as this cohesive way that we classify instruments. He then invites me on stage where I immediately challenge everything that he just presented, as these instruments do not fit the current classification system. And then beyond that, this is actually a picture. I was brought in to work with their symphony, specifically their woodwind section, in that they were having really big tuning issues. In general, I'm a tuner, so I got to work and go through all the problem areas of their symphony. Specifically, it was the flutes were not talking with the oboes. Once we solved that, everything kind of raveled back together. And then lastly, this year I was doing master classes in China. So I was working with a company there that is edging into mass production. And I was both there as a consultant to walk their factory floor, to both kind of talk about and critique their process. And then the picture over here, I'm sitting with their tuners and giving them master classes on tuning, which for me is a great joy because there's not many people who do what I do. So to sit with people who are eager to learn the information is highly engaging for me. So that's my journey as a teacher. We're going to shift to my journey as a maker. So I can see it now that in 2010 to 2012, when I traveled to festivals around the world, I got exposed to the art of tuning. Now, coming from a background of classical music and playing an intonation-based instrument, my ear was already pretty good. But to hear someone tune, which is to hit these with a hammer, is absolute cacophony. And then the resulting sound is what you heard. So it really couldn't be sounds that are more opposite. Absolute chaos, metal hammer, to sweet sounding steel. So this is actually now kind of this famous picture. My friend Kyle Cox, who termed the coin handpan, he's deep in that tent. And he was stuck in that tent for 4 days. He was the first tuner to come to this festival in the history of the festival. And as you can see, lined up out of his tent are instruments waiting to be tuned. This line never got shorter. It stayed like that for 4 days. But what was going on is he would be in there making all that noise, and then the instrument would come out and it would sound brand new, which to me was absolutely fascinating because I could hear it, I could watch it, but I in no way understood it. It was like being witness to black magic. So this is when that seed of wanting to learn to tune was planted. One of the issues with learning to tune is akin to being maybe a young tattoo artist. Nobody wants your first tattoo. So like most tattoo artists, they usually start on themselves until you have a friend that's brave enough. Tuning is very similar. I had this wonderful personal collection of instruments that I had collected from around the globe, but I was not about to start learning to tune on those because you can just ruin them. You can destroy an instrument. So I turned to the 55-gallon barrel. I looked back to the deep heritage and thought there must be a ton of lessons waiting for me in a 55-gallon barrel. So in 2012 and 2013, I picked up the hammer, as we say, and taught myself to tune. It did not go well. It was arduous and brutal. There were no resources at the time. There were no books or lessons or teachers or mentors. So this is where I'm going to jump in. I really used the scientific process, almost like I was debugging code. I'm going to bring this down to its simplest form. I'm going to make one shell and put one note in it. I'm going to figure that out. Once I figure that out, I'll do another shell and I'll put the 8 notes in and I'll figure that out. It was a way to kind of slowly understand each one of the variables as they got introduced. And this took about a year to gather slightly beyond the basics of tuning. I would like to make note that these barrels that I got actually came from the Barlow, before it was the Barlow. There was a glass blower there named Richard, and he was so kind to give me free barrels, so I had free material to work on. His only request was that I had to bring back what I made to show him in order to earn another barrel. So having someone who's deep in the crafts give you a little leg up is such a huge thing, so I want to give him a little bit of credit. So this is the first time I introduced dimples, which we'll talk about later, to try to understand what they do and their form and function. I did spend 6 months in a room that didn't have any windows. I eventually had enough money to afford a building that did have windows. But by the time I came out of this room, I had acquired the skills to be what we call a retuner, meaning I could take an existing instrument and service it. So this is one of the complicated things about these instruments is if you own them, you do not tune them. Please do not even attempt to tune them. Put the hammer down. You have to bring it to a professional. And at this time in the United States, my friend Kyle was the only professional tuner in the hemisphere. He was very eager to be done offering his retuning service, and he saw me, the young buck, coming up, and was very happy to hand me half of the world. So I became a professional retuner in 2013, and at that point I took over the domain of North America, South America, Australia, and then at that time the Eastern Asian seaboard, which was mostly South Korea and Japan. So that became my domain. So I had spent years traveling the globe to try to find these instruments, and then one day they just started showing up in droves from all over the world. It was a fascinating shift. I think this was actually in the Press Democrat of me retuning. This is an existing instrument. I actually remember this one specifically because it was from Australia. This is a generation of the hung. They're one of their final generations. This is an extremely valuable instrument, and they only made maybe 900 of them. And the reason I remember this one is because when I sent it back to Australia, it got stuck in customs for 7 weeks. And it was not at all worth the stress of doing the retune, but a significant little moment for me there. So the other thing about tuning is you often can take it on the road. I do not need much to tune. I have a hammer. Vanessa, can I have you grab that hammer that's on the floor right there? I'll show you guys what a tuning hammer looks like. Thank you, ma'am. I travel with this hammer and my phone. That's it. So it's a light little travel, but I've taken this all over the world with me and offered a retuning service. So I might say, hey everybody, I'm going to be in Vancouver at the end of the month at this address. Come find me and I'll service your instrument. So this became a really significant offer that I had for the world, which was to be another reputable retuner. The thing though was that I had learned how to tune, which is arguably the most difficult part of the art form. So it was only a matter of time that I started kind of reverse engineering and then offering my own instruments. So in 2013, I also went into production of my own version of the instrument. And we're going to talk about all the processes that went into this. But since 2013 until now, I'm in production. I started a list in 2013, and I have yet to get to the bottom of it, which is a very interesting problem to have as a business. It's a very good problem, but it's a very annoying problem as someone who really likes to finish lists. So we're going to transition out of my story, and we're going to start talking about how they're made. My story is going to get interlaced in here again, but we're going to kind of just go over all of the procedures and processes. So we're going to start by talking about the different raw materials that can be used to make this instrument. We're then going to transition into talking about how we take that raw material and we turn it into a blank shell with all the different production methods. Then comes the really critical choice, which is, now that we have this blank canvas, what is it going to become? How do we choose the notes? How do we lay the notes out? And what is it going to become as the final form? I'm going to commit a crime tonight, which is that I'm going to brush over the art of tuning. It deserves its own entire evening. It deserves a novel, a book, a year-long class. We're going to talk about some of the specifics, but I really just want to make a note that we are going to brush over the most significant and challenging part of the art form, which is tuning. Lastly, we're going to talk about how we join the hemispheres. I want you guys to think, don't shout it out, but I want you to think about how we might join the hemispheres. And then when we get to that, I'm going to have you shout it out. So put that little bee in your bonnet. And lastly, we're going to talk about the finishing work. How do we take this thing and get it across the finish line and get it in the customer's lap? So raw materials. Imagine that we're baking a cake. If I start with the raw materials to make a vanilla cake, it's never going to end up a chocolate cake. And vice versa. If I start with vanilla, chocolate, it's going to be already predetermined. So even when we're picking the raw materials, it's already determining the sound of the instrument. So there is an original material, and it's made from low-carbon cold-rolled steel. Pretty common material. In the States, it's called 1008, or abroad, it's called DCO4. The thickness range is anywhere from around 1 millimeter to 1.2 millimeters. The other material that we use, I'm going to talk a little bit about this. We're going to get into some science, not too deep, but we're going to talk about gas nitriding and why it's important. But we'll get to that. The other version of material is stainless steel. For any of the metal people in the world, the room here, we do not use stainless 304. That's a really common type of stainless. It does not work for our process. We've tried it. But ones that do work are 430, 439, and 441. For the average person in the room, those are unusual stainless steels. They're very formable, but they're used for really specific things. Not a common steel. Actually rather hard to find in our country. Easier to find abroad. So I get questions like, why don't you do it in copper? What about brass or bronze? The material that we use has to be able to withstand the compressive forces of tuning. If it cannot handle the compressive forces of tuning, it buckles. You guys have all played with buckling material. If you've ever snapped a Snapple cap, or you've pushed on the bottom of an oil can and it's clicked back and forth, that is our worst nightmare in our world. If we have a note that buckles, we're in really big problem area. So we have to look for materials that can both withstand and hold the compressive forces of tuning. So I'm going to double back to that word there, gas nitriding, and we're going to pick that up in a minute. But gas nitriding is a way to take material that isn't strong enough to withstand the compressive forces and to harden it to the point that it can withstand compression. And there's a few of our shell productions that require that hardening. So we have picked our raw material, either low carbon cold rolled steel or one of these kind of unicorn stainless steels. And now we have to figure out how we're going to make the shell. So we're going to go through a couple different variations of how to make a shell. This first one is the most brutal way to make a shell. Once every couple years, I do a project that I call the 3-hammer challenge. That's my logo in the back, where I abandon all of my tools in the shop and I attempt to make an instrument just using 3 hammers. It's incredibly difficult, but it is a way to get me back to the basics to make sure I can still do it. So what you're seeing here is me starting a shell just hand sinking. So I'm using a big wood mallet, and that material is clamped in between what we call a tuning ring or a sinking ring, and I'm just working it by hand. I think at some point I have to stop and put some tape on my thumb because I got a blister. You'll see that I'm slowly checking how deep it is. Real time, this takes anywhere from 60 to 90 minutes, kind of nonstop. This is a brutal way to make one of these instruments. It's not a sustainable business model either. You will break your body. I'm the right size body to do this work, and it still will break your body. But if you don't have a lot of money and you don't have all the tools, this is a viable way to make an instrument. So we're getting close. So one of the interesting things that's happening here is I'm working it cold, so I'm not heating it. I'm also not hammering it into a mold or anything, so it's not being backed. But what's happening is as I'm sinking it, it's getting harder from being work hardened. If you were to put your hand on that shell right now, it would be warm to the touch as a result of all the friction from each hammer blow. We're going to go to the other version of hand sinking. This is using air hammers or pneumatic hammers. This also takes 45 to 60 minutes. This is a more effective way to make a shell, also incredibly brutal on your body. I can't begin to emphasize how loud this process is. We're well beyond 120 decibels in the room. If you've ever been at a concert where you could feel the bass in your chest, it's that. So right now, I'm slowly swirling in and working the material to depth. I'm not really worrying about it being too smooth because I'll fix that later. But again, this is being work hardened. That material is getting harder as I sink it. But one of the most challenging things is as I'm working the tool and the shell's getting deeper, I have to stir the pot more and more to honor that radius that I'm creating of that hemisphere. So as it gets deeper, this tool gets more and more unwieldy. So this might be the last pass with the sinking head. And I'm going to go off to the corner and put on a different hammer head. This is a module hammer, and I'm going to come back with a smoothing hammer head. And you'll see those golf ball sized dents are just going to slowly go away. And I think we do one more pass here. Effective way to make a shell. Again, really brutal on your body, really not a great business model, not super sustainable. So there are more sustainable methods using big machinery. So the original instrument, the hung that I spoke of, was made using this technique called deep draw. So this is a 500-ton press. It might fit in this room. And it's going to press down. The material sandwiched in between. And it's pushing a male form into the material and drawing out a shell. The resulting shell is going to be absolutely perfect. Extremely uniform, extremely repeatable. This is real time. Takes about a minute round trip. The issue is that shell that's going to pop out is not hard enough. You are not able to tune that shell. So we have to do that secondary process where we infuse it with nitrogen and it gets hard enough for our application. So this is what it looks like when it pops out of that press. There's a big flange. You laser trim that off and you've got a really nice blank shell. One of the problems with this is you're working with a third-party company, and it's a big upfront investment. So this was not something that I could pursue early on, which is why I was hand sinking. I didn't have $20,000 or $30,000 to invest in tooling. So I hand sunk for a number of years, first by hand like you saw, and then eventually using air hammers. I can tell you that every time I sunk a shell, I was thinking there must be a better way. Thankfully, I did find a better way. So in 2015, I stumbled across hydroforming. Hydroforming is a type of metal forming that usually uses a pressurized bladder that then kind of drapes and forms the material over some mold. That's a separate type of hydroforming. The one we're going to talk about is a subset that's called fluid forming, where you don't have a bladder, you have fluid right on the part. So in 2015, I designed and engineered a machine that would hydroform metal for me. This is kind of this blown up schematic, but in essence, it's a really simple machine. It just harnesses physics and water pressure. The way it works is, I'll go to the plumbing next, but essentially, it's going to work. You pump water into this plate, it gets caught between the material that you want to form, and it just blows up a bubble through the ring plate. We'll see some pictures of it. But it just harnesses water pressure. And I always have to say it out loud, water is not compressible, meaning you cannot put more water than there is available volume. Unlike air, like an air compressor, you can keep packing air in. You cannot do that with water. So the plumbing was actually really simple. Garden hose to pressure washer into some pressure valves, and then just into the plate. And then you just capture the pressure and you just let the material blow up. So this is what it looks like. So I would turn the machine on, and 70 seconds later, this would be the result. So now the machine's open. So similar to that deep draw shell, we've got excess that we have to trim off, but we have harnessed physics to make a near perfect shell. I was the first to do this for our industry, so it was a really rather top secret moment for me. I spent a year almost like skunk works, in absolute top secret, developing and then learning how to use this canvas for our art form. This is something I did just to kind of show the stretch distribution. So I initially drew this grid on inch by inch, and then this is the resulting shell. So you can see where the stretch distribution is and how uniform of a shell it is. I stood over that in my shop for about an hour and just stared at it. This is me just kind of in awe. At this point in time, I had an extremely intimate knowledge with what it took to bend and form that material, and to watch a machine do it in a 60th of the time that it took me, and to do it better than I ever did, was both equal parts inspiring and extremely humbling. So we're going to watch the end portion of a shell form. So it's forming right here. This is also real time. So it's forming down. So the water is coming in and being captured and just pressurizing the material. And as the water that comes in increases in pressure, it just becomes stronger than the material, and the material just starts to bend. Does anybody want to shout out how much PSI they think you have to pump into this system to get it to go?
3,000.
You guys are way high. About 350 PSI, but I should say that's 350 PSI into the system. That's a 20-inch shell, so we'll crunch the numbers real quick. So 20-inch diameter, 10-inch radius, squared is 100 times pi is 314. Each one of those 314 square inches is getting 350 pounds of pressure. So within the system, the pressures get incredibly great and absolutely terrifying, which is why these plates are 1.5 inches thick, those bolts are 1.5 inches thick, because the pressures are immense. So I found myself in this unique position in that I was sitting on a golden goose. I had this machine that was relatively easy to make, very simple to operate, and nobody else knew about it. So I opted to open source. Open source means that I just gave it away. And this was mostly welcomed. It did ruffle some feathers, but I didn't feel any fear in open sourcing in that I was giving away a blank canvas. It in no way ensured that you were going to be a good painter. As you'll see after we form the shell, there's a ton of other processes that need to happen. It was an opportunity, again, to uplift all the makers in the world. Hey, you don't have to beat your body up, and you don't have to have all this money to get started. Here is this middle ground where you can create a really high-quality shell, and you can also do it in-house, and you won't break the bank. So this is an existing map in my shop. I've kept track of all the machines around the world. We're on all the continents except for Antarctica now, and most recently was Australia and Nepal. Very interestingly, that company, my friend's company, Pantheon Steel, they were the first adopter of this process. So the people that made my first instrument for me ended up adopting my process to continue on in their production, which was a really wonderful full circle moment for me. And here it is still going. This is my 10-year-old daughter putting a pin in the map in Melbourne, Australia. And we get about 1 pin a quarter. So 10 years later, it's still existing and ongoing. One of the great things about open sourcing is that if you go off and make an improvement, the only request is that you come back and tell everybody. So that happened too. There was 2 companies specifically that improved the process, improved the machines, and they came back and told us, and we all got to improve together. So hydroforming was something that I'm still really proud of, and it has become this staple of the production method within our industry. Thank you. So I finished with hydroforming and continued to use it, but I also continued working on another production process. And this one was absolutely skunkworks, top secret. I didn't talk about it. I really haven't talked about it up until right about now. So in 2020, I opted to go the other way. I went patent pending. I invented a process that was unique enough that it was possible to put a patent on it. I'm not going to go into great detail, but I will say that the repeatability of it is extremely high, and the speed of it is extremely high. So high that we were able to increase production 350% using this new procedure. And this is a never-before-seen photo of me in 2020 with the first production batch using my patented process. So it has been a wild ride over the last 5 years. operating in the intellectual property world. And if any of you have ever pursued a patent, you also know how incredibly expensive it is. So it has been an awesome and brutal thing to experience. So those are the different shell production processes. So we picked our raw material. We either did it by hand sinking. Hand sinking stainless steel is almost impossible. You could do deep draw, that big press machine. Hydroforming, the process that I developed. Or if you're me, or you want to come talk to me, you can use my patented process. So this brings us to scale choice. We have created our blank canvas. Now we're going to turn it into a musical instrument. What is it going to become? So this is what it looks like in my world. This is the inside of a shell, and these are all the templates that I've laid out. Location, size, placement, angle are all mission critical to the success or failure of the instrument. You can make a mistake here that you won't know that you've made until you've worked on this thing for 20 or 40 hours. So this is an absolute mission critical step. So we're going to go into a little bit of music theory, but not too much. So most of these instruments, like the one on stage, have 7 to 9 notes around the outside with a bass note in the center. We have now, 25 years later, a most common scale. It's in D minor, and it's expressed with these notes here. So the center note is D, and then low to high, A, B flat, C, D, E, F, G, A, C. They have octaves that are attached to them, but these are all kind of like middle range on the piano. This is a visual I'll give you of that same scale. So starting over here, we have the lowest note in the center, and then we've got the first note here, second, third, fourth, and so on. So it plays in a zigzag pattern, right, left, right, left, right, left, and so on. Almost all instruments are laid out like this. So I could sit down in a handpan and I could play it right, left, right, left, right, left, and it wouldn't matter what the scale was. It would help me ascend and descend the scale. This is not unique to handpans. There are other instruments that are set up like this. A kalimba or a thumb piano plays right, left, right, left, right, left. Or there is a African harp, a kora, that plays right, left, right, left, right, left. So this is just another application of that right-left model, which leads to really high ease of play. Okay, we're going to go into music theory. We're going to be fine, everybody. So we're going to talk about harmonic structure. So I want you to imagine that I'm going to pluck a string. When I pluck the string goes up and down like it does here. When just the entire string goes up and down, it creates the lowest possible frequency that it can make, and we call that the fundamental. But that's not the only way it wiggles. You can cut it in half like a sine wave, and it's going to take that fundamental frequency and double it, times 2, and times 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and so on. So this is kind of where we start to deviate from its predecessor, the steel pan. When you're tuning a steel pan, the goal is to emphasize the presence of all of the harmonics that are possible to be in the note. And it goes beyond 8, 9, 10, and 11. So steel pans have this really bright timbre, and the bright timbre comes from the presence of all these upper harmonics. That is exactly what we're trying not to do in the world of handpans. So the way that we do that is we eliminate all the other frequencies beyond just the first 3. So we keep a fundamental, we keep the double of that, which is an octave, and then we keep the triple of that, which is a fifth above the octave. And we're going to talk about how we do that. There's a structure that enables us to limit how this membrane is going to vibrate. So the frequencies that we're looking at, I just kind of said them out loud. But each note, so I'm going to say note and then switch to this other word, tone field. And the reason that note is incorrect is because there are 3 frequencies here. We keep a fundamental, an octave, and a fifth above that. So to go back to that scale that I mentioned, it has a total of 10 tone fields, 9 around and 1 more in the center. So that means on that instrument, there are 30 frequencies that have been tuned into that material, making this an incredibly complex, rich landscape of harmonics. So not only do each one of those notes, the 3 within it, have to work, but we also have to make that landscape work across the instrument. So I had said that I was going to tell you how we eliminate those extra frequencies, and the way that we do that is with the dimple. The dimple is without a doubt the unsung hero of the art form. By putting a rigid structure within a vibrating membrane it limits how it can wiggle or how it can vibrate. And in essence, we're just keeping 3 modes of vibration: the fundamental, the octave, and the fifth. This is an archaic way, although effective way, to make a dimple. This is back to that 3-hammer challenge where I'm suffering through making one by hand. And you can put the dimples in before the notes are in. You can put the dimples in after the notes are in. All you need is a big rigid structure within the membrane, so it limits its modes of vibration. So I'm going to show you another technique here using a press. This is a much faster and more efficient and less brutal on your body way to make a dimple. So I'm just pressing a ball bearing into a piece of polyurethane onto our shell. This one was hydroformed, by the way. And then that's going into a form that's going to leave me a really nice dimple. So there goes, put that away. There's the dimple form. And we're resulted with a really nice, clean dimple. So within the dimple, there is the overall note and its structure. My kid said I had to warn you when I was going to use big science words. So a big science word is coming. Anticlastic, hyperbolic, paraboloid. Big science words. It looks something like this. So the shape of our note has curves in opposite directions. That's that anticlastic part. And the reason that's important is it allows us to adjust the membranes slightly more individually so they don't affect one side versus the other. My kids also said, Dad, don't use the big science word, just tell them it's a Pringles chip. So it is in fact a Pringles chip or a saddle shape. Looking at those notes over there, you wouldn't know at first glance that there's complex curves in there. But if you were to take a straight edge and run it over the long axis and the short axis of that note, it would expose that it is in fact a Pringles chip or anticlastic hyperbolic paraboloid. And again, playing with curvature is one of the ways that we tune these. So with that in mind, we're going to just brush over some of the tuning variables that we play with. So first is surface area. Again, go back to the string. Short string sounds higher. Long string sounds lower. Just extrapolate that to 2 dimensions. More surface area, lower frequency. Smaller surface area, higher frequency. Tension. Again, go back to the string. If I add tension to either side of the string, that's going to make the frequency go up. And the inverse is also true. But again, we're extrapolating this out to, I'm saying 2 dimensions, it's really 3 dimensions, but a 2-dimensional plane. Compression. I talked about this at the beginning around the material properties. These materials need to be able to withstand compression. In our world, compression is hammering the material down as if you're pressing, let's say, a balloon onto a table. But you press that material down and it stays. And most significantly, it doesn't buckle when you press it. So we play a lot with compression. And then curvature, playing with those gentle curves of the Pringles chip. I just put this in today. These are all very dependent on what material choice, shell production method, and dimple ratios you used. Again, this is this compounding steps along the way. And every instrument, every maker, every generation is slightly different. So we picked the raw material. We made the shell. We put the dimples in. We talked about the Pringles chip. Now we're actually ready to put hammer to steel, and we're going to lightly talk about rough tuning. So rough tuning is probably the loudest part of tuning. You're really just hitting a piece of metal with a hammer until it starts to move back and forth a little bit. All we're trying to do within the realm of rough tuning is get the note healthy, get it in the ballpark, and get those 3 frequencies somewhat lined up. Rough tuning happens here in what we call a tuning apparatus. This can both go end over end, and it also can spin this way. So I have all access to those notes. Surrounded here this is probably the nerdiest room in my workshop, are a bunch of different tuning devices. Anybody know what these tuning devices are called? Shout it out. I heard it. We'll get there. These old ones? Close, very close. It's a relative of the oscilloscope. These are strobe tuners. This one was built in '99. This was built in the 1980s in Japan. This one was in the 60s. And this one was actually pre-1940. It is more accurate than the tuner that's on your phone, but it also takes 10 minutes to warm up because it runs on tubes. All of these pale in comparison to what you said, which is the digital version that's right here in the middle. 1 which we're going to get to. So these are all different ways you can tune it, but they give you visuals, active input for where those frequencies are, so you can start to line them up. So again, we're working with the harmonic structure of, we have our lowest one, the fundamental, we have the second one, which is the octave, and we also have a fifth above that. So I'm going to go over here and I'm going to demonstrate what those sound like. So we hear that as one sound, but I can isolate both the second and third harmonic. So that goes for all the notes. So within this structure, we have to come up with a way to tune them and keep an eye on them. I got really lucky that I was at the dinner table in London in 2010 when the idea for this program happened. I was with a tuner, an engineer, a computer programmer, and somehow I was at the table as just a representative of someone who was passionate about the art form. This program revolutionized how we tune these. Those aforementioned strobe tuners, they're like striking a flint. This is a flamethrower. Absolute quantum leap in what we're able to do with tuning. It's fully customizable. I learned recently that I was accused of being the most complex user of this program in the world, which I took as a compliment. But I'm actually always in touch with Lino, the creator, asking and urging for updates when I have ideas of how it maybe could work better. So we've got the instrument tuned. This is the other unsung hero of the instrument. It doesn't get nearly enough credit. It's the bottom shell. And the reason this is important to kind of notate is that a steel pan, its predecessor, does not have a bottom shell. In fact, it doesn't have a sound chamber at all. So by putting a bottom shell on the instrument, you create what's called, big science words, a Helmholtz resonator. Everybody in this room has played with a Helmholtz resonator. If you've ever taken a bottle and blown across the top and made that noise, that's a Helmholtz resonator. You're activating the air chamber until it creates a frequency. These are the same. They're just much bigger than a bottle. But by putting the bottom shell on, you create a Helmholtz resonator. Some of the factors that affect the Helmholtz resonance of these instruments is, how big the shell is, its diameter, its depth, and then also how open this hole is and how deep the neck is. One of the big constraints that we have with bottom shells and the diameter of the hole is actually the majority of tuning is done from the inside of the instrument. So if I pick this hammer up again, you might notice that the handle's cut off because I have to be able to reach into the instrument and get in. So I can tell you that the international standard diameter that most people can get their hand in is 8 centimeters. And so that is an 80 millimeter or 8 centimeter diameter on that port. I'm going to show you a quick video of a rustic way to make a very nice bottom shell. Again, using a press. You might be thinking, Colin, that looks like a red fire extinguisher. And you would be absolutely right. The number of these fire extinguishers that I have bought at scrapyards and sent around the world to young makers as a way for them to start. I can tell you I've had parts made. Bruce made me a part once. I've worked with lathes, and honestly, nothing was better than that $15 fire extinguisher. So that's a DIY to create a bottom shell. So I asked you a question earlier. How do you think we join the hemispheres? Does anybody have any ideas and want to shout it out? Forge weld. Forge weld. Welding is a good guess. Incorrect. That's what everybody guesses. So glue. You could rivet it, but we'd really prefer that you don't. Please don't rivet it. So the reason that we don't weld is because it causes too much energy to transfer from the top shell to the bottom shell. And when I say energy, I mean vibrational energy. It's too close of a bond, and it creates a really metallic sound. So we use glue, and we clamp them. We use different kinds of glue, 2-part epoxies all the way over to polymer hybrids. Glue is a really big variable for the end resulting sound. So once we've glued them, we have to tune them again, and we have to fine tune them. We rough tune them kind of in the general area, but as soon as we take them out of that tuning apparatus, the tuning shifts. And so once you glue it, you have to start the process all over again. Again, it's in the ballpark. But then we go into fine tuning. So I brought one hammer. This is actually my main hammer these days. Again, I have spent all kinds of money on really expensive hammers, custom-made hammers. I 3D printed a hammer. This is a $7 hammer from Harbor Freight, and it is the best hammer I've ever had. And again, I have made this hammer for tuners all over the world. They've used it. I must have one. I spent $7, finish it for them. But we're going to look at a brief video of fine-tuning. I thought about doing it in person. I think it's better that you just watch a video. This video is slightly unique in that inside the instrument we put a GoPro, so it's almost like you're watching a little bit of surgery. So you'll see my hand inside the instrument while I'm working on it, and then you're also going to see that program Linotune kind of hum into life right here. So I'm actively watching the screen, and as you see, fine-tuning is extremely gentle. This is akin to doing surgery with a scalpel. Very, very fine work, very gentle taps. Again, right here I'm playing with compression. I'm trying to compress the note because the octave is sharp. And it doesn't work. So I'm going to come out, and now I'm going to play with surface area. Maybe I expand the surface area of this note a little bit, because I want it to go flat. For those in the room who know, this is actually a really famous instrument. It's the very first curd that was ever made in our world. So it was a really big honor for me to get to work on it. I think that's in a basement somewhere in North Carolina. I think circa 2014. One question we get asked is, how often do these have to be tuned? Every 18 months to 2 years, depending on a bunch of factors. How are you using it? Who made it? Who was the last person to tune it? What material is it? But every 18 months to 2 years, it should come see a professional and be tuned and serviced. So we've done all the things. Last is just to finish the instrument. This is an instrument that I spent a lot of time in a number of years ago. Probably the most aesthetically pleasing instrument I ever made. It had engravings, it had a finished copper rim. Some of the finishing work is aesthetics, some of it is just to ensure the longevity of the instrument. But once it's fine-tuned, it has to rest for a couple days, usually get tuned one more time, and then it's ready for the customer. So we completed the arc of how you make these instruments. Thank you. And now we're going to do the light brag reel. And then we're nearing the Q&A, so if you guys have questions, make sure you keep them in the forefront of your mind. So noteworthy things about my career. I performed on 5 continents. This was a tour that I did in Western China in 2019. Also in 2019, I got to participate in a TEDx. Any opportunity that I have to present as the ambassador of the art form, I jump at it. So this was a great chance to both be on a TED stage, perform, and speak about the art form. In 2020, I ended up on national Japanese TV. It's its own story, but again, I was presented with this opportunity to introduce an entire nation to this new musical instrument. It was a fascinating experience. It is online somewhere. I'm not going to tell you how to find it. So I got to meet Adam Savage, the Mythbuster, and the reason I wanted to meet Adam Savage is I first saw fluid forming in this 30-second clip from the Mythbusters. This tiny little moment in one of their many, many episodes where Jamie Heineman was using water pressure to form material, and it sparked my entire hydroforming journey and also allowed the entire industry to learn about hydroforming. So I had the opportunity to meet Adam and tell him so and shake his hand on behalf of the whole art form to say, hey, thank you very much for how you influenced our art form. He was thrilled to hear it, and he was wonderfully nice. There's been interesting publications across the way. Once again, I find myself with Kyle Cox. He's up there playing his version of the instrument, a halo. And lastly, I met an alien. We get the joke all the time. I'm sure you guys thought it. They look like UFOs. Fortunately, someone just decided to embrace the joke. This was at some festival. This guy showed up as an alien, and I had to get the pic. We're nearing the end here. This is a bit of a sour point, but I wanted to talk about it. There is a big current event in our art form. So it has to do with a legal battle with the original company, Pan Art. So Pan Art in Europe is using a copyright claim to try to stop the production or even performing on these instruments across the EU. This started in early 2020, and by the time I caught wind of it, there was a band of us who decided to come together and come to the defense of the art form. So we formed an international nonprofit called HCU, which stands for Handpan Community United, and we brought it to them. And so for the last 5 years, there's been this really deep, complicated and complex legal battle across the EU in the Netherlands, Germany, Switzerland, and France, having to do with the application of a copyright on a musical instrument. If there's any legal people in the world, this is a fascinating bleeding edge of copyright. But for us, it's a really, really sad thing that could potentially happen. I once again found myself in this really unique position where in 2021, I was asked to be the worldwide spokesperson for HCU. So I then was on my biggest stage speaking on behalf of the entire community and coming to the defense of the art form, which being asked to be in that position was probably one of the greatest honors I've had within the art form. We don't know what's going to happen. It's going to take a couple more years, but unfortunately, actually is not looking good for the art form. Copyright is good for 70 years after the death of the holder, so it has this kind of century-long potential ban that could happen. So we're still working the problem, but unfortunately, it's not looking good. How are handpans used? This is a question I get quite often. Typically, hobbyists. Someone who wants to come home at the end of the day and just relax and do a little tappy-tappy. They often use it for stress relief. It's a way to kind of enter this gentle meditative state. I see it used in hospice, which is a wonderful application for it. These instruments are not tied to any really known music. As a result, the listener can really release any attachment to what's going to happen musically. And it allows the listener kind of to enter a different relaxing state. It's used a lot in this county and this part of the world in ceremony. So people in altered states find this instrument to be a really grounding sound. For meditative purposes, people often talk about how they slip into a flow state playing these instruments as a result of the nature and ease of play. It's also used by professionals. Just yesterday at my workshop was the main percussionist for the San Francisco Symphony, and they'll be using one of my instruments in an upcoming concert series. So absolutely it's being folded into professional music. And really, you can use it any way you see fit. Please just don't drop it or hit it too hard or have your cat jump on it. We're nearing the end here. So who plays mine? Our friend Ned Kahn plays ours. So I want to just give a shout out to Ned. Ned's the reason that I'm here tonight. I came to see his presentation a couple months ago, and as a result, I'm now on the stage. But Ned, I knew of Ned's work long before I was doing this work. So to get to make instruments for someone whose art I find really inspiring has been a really sweet thing. So thanks, Ned. Who has played mine? There was one really interesting one that I wanted to share, the Dalai Lama. That was kind of a neat one. So in blue is my customer, and he had an opportunity to attend prayer one morning with the Dalai Lama. And the story is such that you can put out offerings for His Holiness, maybe some beads, a book, or whatever. And so this customer put the entire instrument out, not to gift it to him, but to gift him the gift of music. And so he got to interact with it, and I heard it was a really sweet moment. So just in review, 2000, that's when these instruments were first developed. I discovered them in 2007, also when the term handpan was coined. My first touch was in 2009. In 2010, I started performing internationally. In 2012, I did that first teaching DVD. 2013, I taught myself to tune and launched my own brand. 2015, I developed an open sourced hydroforming. In 2020, I went patent pending. In 2021, unfortunately, I had to become the worldwide spokesperson for the art form. In 2024, so just last year, I crossed over a high watermark in our industry, which is I've created 1,000 instruments now. And lastly, here in 2025, I'm still teaching globally, I'm still in production, and I'm absolutely still tuning. So I wanted to say thank you, and I'm going to leave you with this small, silly clip from about a decade ago. This was actually the second take. The first take, I almost got it, but the knitting needle fell out of the monkey's arm. So I had to do a second take. So it is an interesting application that on some of these instruments nestled in there are common melodies that we can play. Does anyone know this melody? Can you shout it out? Ode to Joy, absolutely. Heard it in church. Thank you very much. So what now? Try a handpan, grab a business card, reach out for a workshop tour, and we're going to ask some questions. So here are some prompts. Ask away. Thank you for being patient with your Q&A, and I'm going to go right to you because you've been so patient. The question was, do those two instruments have different tonalities? Absolutely. So one of them is in a variation of D minor, the first one I played. And I can just run them up and down to show you. So you can hear the difference. This is F major, this is D minor. For any of the music theorists out there, those are relative major and minor, or for the non-music, peanut butter jelly.
Qualities.
You a plant? Somebody plant that question. All right, so what was the first question? The two companies that influenced hydroforming. Yeah, so there was a young maker in Southern California named Sean Beaver who had a company named Symphonic Steel. He's an absolute engineer, and so he aided in one improvement, which was to, instead of using a gasket to keep the pressure in, was to put a groove in that top plate and drop in an O-ring. The second part was from the company Pantheon Steel, who said before you put that O-ring in, mill the plate completely machine flat. So those two together just solved some of the problems we had where we were losing pressure. So my original design, I would say, was like 90% there, and those two companies got the other 5% each. You ask a much broader question, which is a very good question. I think in each different production method, from hand sinking to hydroforming to deep draw, which I've used, to my patented process, there is a sweet spot in each one of those. There's so many variables that affect the end sound. It can take 100 instruments to get a certain generation of instrument dialed in. So whether it's hand sinking, you might have to adjust your gas nitriding. If it's hydroforming, you might have to adjust how much material is being drawn in to get a more uniform shell. If it's deep draw, you might have to adjust your dimple size because the uniformity is so consistent across the shell. And the patented process, it has its pros and cons as well. So I think there's advantages and disadvantages to all of them. I think any single one, if you spend enough time in that production method, you can make extremely high quality instruments. Great question. So the original instrument, the hong, the first generation had 8 around, so that was an original classic. Their later generations just had 7 around, but oftentimes it becomes more of a real estate issue. You only have so much surface area per shell, and every shell size, it can only be so tall or so wide to keep it playable, so it becomes an issue of real estate. So if I'm doing really low notes, those notes are going to be bigger, and then they're going to eat up more real estate, so I can't have as many. So if I want to have more notes, I might make the instrument higher in tonality to shrink the notes down to gain surface area. Again, just kind of a real estate issue. This is the industry large, which is 53 centimeters, or for us doing imperial, about 21 inches. Most people would do okay or struggle to have this on their lap. They do go smaller, but again, to your point, reducing that diameter means you're reducing their overall surface area and you're decreasing the amount of notes or how low those notes can be on that instrument. Yes? So she said, why? She's pointing at this and she said, why D minor? A great question. I get fired up about D minor.
What does Indian music have to do?
Nothing.
Well, why did you say that?
Yeah, so D minor, let's remove the minor for now. The range of D is like a best fit model for our instrument. All these instruments have limitation both through material, diameter, chamber issues. So D minor is the best fit model for the surface area issue, for one of the internal chamber issues, for the material thickness issues, and in the world of music, it's fairly friendly. For those who don't know music, you go to the piano, you play all the white keys except for the B, you'd play a black key for B flat. Pretty user-friendly. If, as a cellist, if you said, hey, can we play in D minor, I would say, great. If you said, can we play in C sharp minor, I would tell you to fuck off. So there are certain keys that are more friendly for certain instruments, and as a result, D minor, we kind of just slowly narrowed our way down there. I love playing not in D minor. I love making not in D minor. I've probably made 700 instruments in D minor. But I love C sharp minor, I love E major, I love E flat, I love anything but D minor. But as a result of all the reasons I just said, I mostly make things in D minor. Yep, you're absolutely right. So the jelly over there is F major, and the peanut butter is D minor. And they're also relative majors in minor, so they're the same notes, just arranged differently. Oh, I was wondering if someone was going to ask, hey, at my size, I'm like, let's make them bigger. I don't have any lap limitations. There are a few reasons. You know, as you start increasing diameter, there is this desire to put more notes on it. And as we start putting more notes on it, it just starts sounding more like a steel pan. So I kind of tip my hat back to the steel pan and say, hey, if you want 20 or 30 notes, they already do that. It's wonderful. It's called a steel pan. So it starts to kind of go away from the original design, which is to increase the playability of this by reducing the notes. With that said, there was a company in Japan that hydroformed, I think it was a meter, but they made it into a steel pan that you could interact with at a park. We really wanted them to put another shell on it to make a giant hand pan, but the design and what was paid for was to have this hand-played version in a park.
What's the advantage of having not a steel pan?
I mean, having a steel pan makes it easier to play because you use mallets. So for kids in a park, it was just more accessible. That's the nature. The question is, why do you eliminate those upper harmonics? And it just is the specific timbre of the instrument. If you start having those upper partials or harmonics in it, it starts sounding really, really bright. You know, we would say, in our world, we would say shrill. The steel pan world would say bright. We're talking about the same things, but looking at it from a different angle. So we're just chasing the specific tonality of our instrument by just having those three frequencies present. Good question. That's a really good question. I think it found me at a really specific time in my life. So it just kind of jumped into my world at a time where I was really wanting and needing something. So I think that's part of it. It has yet to be boring. You know, musicians come to this instrument and they say it's so limited. But also, you know, if you did a box that was 1 meter by 1 meter and you told a dancer to dance in it, they could do really interesting things. But they would find ways to express themselves within those constraints. So I think it's within the constraints that I find a lot of inspiration. That's on the playing side. On the making side, they're wildly difficult to make. You know, it feels like on a good day making these is like just on this side of impossible. On a bad day, it's just fucking impossible. Fortunately, there's less bad days now than there was 10 years ago, but it's just incredibly hard. And so it yields a really, really high reward when you're successful. And I think that's going to keep me coming back for my whole life. Do I have a personal favorite scale? I'm so glad you asked. I always want people to ask me this question. I hate the pentatonics. They are the vanilla ice cream of our world. Actually, the scales that I like most, I'll give you broad and then I'll zoom in, is I like the hexatonic. So instead of diatonic where you use all 7 and not pentatonic where you use 5 and repeat them, the hexatonics tend to work really well because you get the first 6 and then typically you would just repeat 2 on the top. And that works really, really well for our scales. Specifically, the peanut butter over there is my favorite scale. One thing I brushed over is that we actually often don't say things like D minor or minor major. Most people in our world don't speak music theory at all, and that's totally okay. My job is to speak music theory on your behalf. So one thing that we do is we name the scales based on how they feel emotionally. So the far scale over there, it is in D minor, but we call it a Celtic because you can play lots of Celtic riffs on it. This F major, again, we're calling it F major using that Western classical lens, the Western music lens, but we call it a Riviera because it has the essence of whoever named it, felt like that fit this scale. So they all have different scale names. There's La Serena, there's Equinox, shout them out, there's Isha Civita. There's pygmy. Pygmy's a big one. I don't like pygmy. So for me, curd is the king right now.
So they all have different moods.
They all have different moods, and the names try to capture the moods. But also, so if I don't speak music theory and you don't speak music theory, I could say, what are you playing? And you say curd, and that means something to me.
Can you hear a little bit of one of those?
Absolutely.
Good idea. On the Riviera.
On the Riviera. If you guys will allow it, I'm just going to come and sit because it's more comfortable for me.
You need a chair?
No, this will do. I'm tall enough. Final question, and then you can come up and chat me after. This is a very good question. The question was, instruments have a learning curve. What is the learning curve for this instrument? A barrier to entry for this instrument is actually pretty easy. If I've done my job right, which is to create a healthy instrument with a good cohesive scale, and then guide you to the scale that feels best for you, similar to like the wand chooses the wizard, and you can do this, you're going to be off and running. It looks different for everybody. If you have some musical background, that is going to help. Actually, if you have too much musical background, that can actually hinder the experience because you're overthinking it. But yeah, barrier to entry for these instruments is really, really low. It's not like a piano, which you have to know what chords and what keys, or like the guitar with a stupid G chord that I could never get my finger over for. The idea is that the design of the instrument is to enable you to get up and running really, really quickly. Easy to learn, hard to master. I actually really agree with that. So while there are limitations to the instrument in that it doesn't have all the notes, it makes it really easy to get going, but it does not seem to have any depth in terms of how deep you could go. So I could give you an example. So that little passage I played, I'm going to run a bass line, which is these chords. And then I'm going to add a rhythm while I run that. And I want to point out that my hands are switching off on the center note, but that rhythm is staying. So it's a lot of this business. So we have a rhythm and we have that bass line. And then I'm going to run a melody. The melody is going to be really simple. It's like this. But if I put it all together, so that gives you a little peek into what exactly I'm doing. So easy to learn, hard to master. Guys, I want to say thank you so much for having me. Absolute joy. Thank you very much.
Hey, thank you.
Hey, thank you
That
very
was
much.
fun.
Thank you
That was
very
good.
much.
Gosh, that was great. Thank you all for coming.